Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be covering some of the core concepts of identity in AWS and relating them back to the wizarding world of Harry Potter. So identity is everything in the cloud. It can get pretty complex, and it's one of these rabbit hole topics where you can deep dive into loads and loads of different articles and get even more and more confused. But in today's video, we're going to take it a step back and we're going to learn about the core concepts. And because it is a bit of an abstract subject, an abstract topic, I'm going to be linking it back to something that most people are very familiar with, and that is Harry Potter. So identity is really important in AWS or in the cloud, because without an identity, there's really not much you can do. There's a concept in identity access and management called the implicit deny. And the implicit deny means that if I haven't explicitly given you permissions to do something, then the default value is to deny everything. And this is designed as a security feature to make sure that people don't accidentally get the permissions to do something that they shouldn't really be allowed to do. It's a security feature. And so what we need to do is we need to navigate around this concept, and we need to understand exactly what I should be doing as a user, or exactly what I should be allowed to do as a user, and provide that as a set of permissions in the cloud and link that to my identity. And this is something called the least privilege principle. And it means giving me the bare minimum privileges I need in order to complete my job. So every AWS service needs you to have a permission in order to use it. That's that implicit deny in action. And in order to get permission to do something, your user or your role has to have a certain set of policies attached to it, and those policies need to specify what you should be allowed and not allowed to do. Okay, so there's a lot of terms introduced just there, and it gets a bit abstract and a bit confusing, so let's bring in the analogy. Okay, so Hogwarts Castle. This is the castle where all the students are, the teachers are, the food is, all the various resources. This is where everyone should be safe, right? And you can compare this to your AWS account. So Hogwarts Castle is like your AWS account. In your AWS account, all your various resources live, and you want them to be as safe as possible. So the next core concept to discuss is authentication. Now this one is a little bit of a stretch. I'm trying to make the analogy work, so just bear with me. So around Hogwarts Castle there is a magical boundary, and the magical boundary allows people in and out of the castle depending on their blood type. So if you have wizard blood or witch blood, then you can come inside, and if you have non-wizarding blood or non-magical blood, then, or you're a muggle, then you stay outside. And this is effectively what the IAM service does. It provides an authentication mechanism. And usually this is done through a username and password. So you provide your username, you provide your password, and you provide, hopefully you should have set this up, a two-factor authentication code. And it says, yep, I know who this person is, let them in. They should be allowed in. And now you've authenticated yourself. Okay, so the next part is simple, and the next part is the concept of users. Now, if we were to go in the castle, so we've authenticated ourselves, we're in the castle, now we see other teachers, we see other students, we just see other living things within the castle. And these are all the residents, and effectively, these are users. So in the IAM world, the students, teachers, etc. are the users, and effectively that is you. Now, if you think about when students arrive to the castle in the first year, they get sat in the Great Hall, they put the sorting hat on their head, and then they're assigned into a house. Now, each house has different levels of access, right? So Gryffindor students can't go into the Slytherin common room, or they can't access the teacher's lounge, and things like that. So these houses effectively are analogous to the concept of groups in IAM. And what a group is it's a type of user. It's a group of users who have similar sort of access, or they work in the same department, or they have a similar sort of life cycle. And it's recommended to use groups because it makes the management of users a lot easier. So what you can do is we can combine all the users in a single group and then give them all a permission. So for example, we can combine all the Gryffindor students in the Gryffindor group and then say, you can only access the Gryffindor common room, and you can only access the Great Hall, but you can't access the Slytherin common room or the astronomy tower, etc. Right? You can't do those things, and that's the concept of groups. Now I mentioned that some of these houses can't go into other houses' common rooms. But how is that actually enforced? Well, in IAM, that's enforced through something called a policy. And a policy is a document that basically outlines what you, as a user or as a group, can or can't do within AWS. So, for example, if you're an administrator user, you probably can do most things. However, if you are a user that only has read-only access, then you're not going to be able to create things, you're not going to be able to delete things. You can probably only just read or list the data that you're allowed to see. So this is done through the concept of policies. And policies can be a lot more fine-grained. I'm just giving you a very high-level and basic example. But policies can be a lot more detailed, and there's more than just the IAM style of policy. There's other styles of policies on AWS, but to keep this simple, I'm just sticking to the most basic style of policy, which is the sort of user policy. And then the final concept to discuss is authorization. Now, authorization is different to authentication. So let's say I'm a Gryffindor student, I get to the Slytherin common room, and I've got a policy attached to me. Remember, policies in the world of IAM say what you can and can't do. So I get to the I get to the Slytherin common room, and then it's going to look at my policy, and it's going to say, hang on, you're a Gryffindor student, you can't come in. This is authorization. So the concept of authorization is what you can and can't do. And this is different to authentication, where authentication is you are proving who you are to a particular service. So first we need to authenticate, and then we need to authorize ourselves. So let's tie all of this together with a real world example. Now let's say my user's already been created in AWS, so an admin has created a user for me, and I want to log in and I want to create an EC2 instance. So the first thing I need to do is I need to authenticate myself. So I will go to the AWS login page for my company. I will type in my username, I will type in my password, and then I'll click submit. And then I'll be asked for two-factor authentication. I get my authenticator app, I get the code, I put it in, and now the IAM service looks at my credentials. It says, yep, we've got a match in the IAM service. This person is a user, let them in, and we're gonna assign them the user identity. Before you come into AWS, IAM doesn't know who you are. Once you've authenticated, it can then give you an identity. And using this identity, we can do multiple things in the cloud. So when we log in, the IAM service knows what policies we've got attached to us. So as a user, I've got X, Y, and Z policies attached to me. And it knows that because all that configuration is stored within the IAM service, and it's configured by one of your AWS account admins. So when I log in, it's going to provide me a set of temporary security credentials. You won't see this, but it happens in the background. So it's going to provide you a set of temporary security credentials assigned against your identity. And this is what you're going to use to authorize yourself against other AWS services. So to create the EC2 instance, I need to head over to the EC2 landing page, and then I'm going to click create instance. Next, I'm going to configure the instance, right? So the instance type, the VPC and the subnet it's in. I'm going to be configuring the EBS volumes that's going to have attached to it and the various size and the type of those, etc. I'm going to be building out the EC2 instance. And in the back end, what the web page is doing is it's building an API request, which is going to go to the EC2 API service. So one thing to understand is that everything on AWS is a API. So this means any action you want to take, create an S3 bucket, create a Lambda function, delete a Lambda function. Any action you want to take is done via an API. However, for security, management, governance reasons, these APIs obviously aren't open to everybody. And like I mentioned, there's an implicit deny. So if I'm not allowed to do it explicitly, then I'll be denied. And so when I click submit, after I've designed my EC2 instance, once I've clicked create, it's going to send a request over to the AWS EC2 API service. And what that service is going to do is it's going to authorize me. So it's going to look at my user, it's going to look at my credentials, and it's going to use the IAM service to say, is this user authorized to call these various APIs that need to be called in order to create an EC2 instance? If yes, then it's going to pass the request through, and then my instance is going to start to be created. If no, what you will see is you will see a permissions error come up on your EC2 console. So I hope that's helped you to understand some of the core concepts that you need to get started with identity access and management. So we've covered the concept of users, groups, policies, authentication, and authorization. Now, there's one more thing you'll come across, and that is the concept of roles. Now, a role is quite similar to a user, but unlike a user, the role has short-term credentials that expire after a certain amount of time. So this is great for things like when you have service-to-service communication. So for example, if I want to write logs from EC2 into CloudWatch, I need to provide the EC2 instance with a role that allows it to write to the CloudWatch service. Or it's great for federation. So federation means that if I've authenticated in, for example, my company identity provider, so that could be Active Directory, I can then federate into my AWS service. So that means I'm using the credentials from Active Directory to log into AWS. And what will happen is AWS will then provide me a role. And the role will have short-term credentials, so I can do a particular set of actions for a certain amount of time. The role will then expire, and then I need to refresh my authentication back from my original identity provider. So that's a bit more of an advanced concept. As a call to action, what I'd highly recommend is go into AWS, start creating some users, play around with them, see the types of permissions that you can add, and see if that allows you to do certain actions within EC2 or within S3 as a starter. If this is the kind of content that you'd like to see more of or is helpful for you, please check out some of my other videos on my YouTube channel where I cover tech on AWS, I cover careers in AWS and careers in tech, and I cover general productivity. And please, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.